Hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of my big fat video blog. I thought it would be good this week to cover one of my very favorite games and give it an actual formal good review. One that I play a lot of, and I followed probably since the dawn of it, and intermittently, of course. It did have a period of a bad patch whenever it first came out, but followed the dawn of one of my favorite games, and also just talk about it generally. um, the game is for PC and PS4. It is called Final Fantasy XIV, and it is a MMORPG, which is really similar to WoW. And so I thought it would be a good idea for me to talk to you guys a little bit about of what the game is about. Um, if you haven't heard anything about it yet, and then also explain how it's different from some of the other MMORPGs. Kind of give you a little bit my history with MMORPGs, and then why I love Final Fantasy XIV so much. So um, let's get started. So Final Fantasy XIV came out around, I believe, 2000. I think it was 11 or 12, and it was a complete mess. There was a prior MMO prior to Final Fantasy XIV called Final Fantasy XI. That was a fantastic MMORPG for its time. It came out, I think it was in 2001. I still remember playing it on my really old E-Machines PC, and it was extremely difficult. In fact, it was one of these games where if you died, then you lost experience points. So you had to constantly keep living in order to progress. And if you didn't, then you actually lost abilities. So it was really hard, and it had a very hard learning curve. But once you got into it, it was actually a really good game because it made you actually be around your friends. It made you actually participate with them, and go on raids and missions with them, in order to actually achieve things. It was really driven by the community that played that game. And so when Square announced that they were going to make a new MMORPG that was way better in all shapes, and forms, giant story, beautiful enemies, the graphics are going to be amazing. Um, People were excited for it, and what happened was that um, Square took the director and designer and lead producer of Final Fantasy XI and tasked him to make 14, and gave him a very short amount of time to do it. And there was very poor management of resources, so they spent too much time developing some things and not enough time developing other things. It was really graphically heavy. In fact, when it first was released, it was so bad that there were these like flower pots that had graphics on the flower pots that actually broke the game. So you'd walk into certain areas and it would just crash your PC. So it really was not playable. But Final Fantasy XIV, when it was released, not only did it have diehard fans of 11 that were following it, but it also had some really great story around it. And the continent of Eorzea, this land where you can go to it and be different races, and experience the world through these characters, and fight against this evil, oppressive empire called the Garlean Empire, which is completely antithetical to the actual like fantasy areas that you play, which are usually like fantasy driven. So there's like a pirate fantasy area that's called Limsa Luminsa, and there's an elfy kind of more traditional forest area called Gridania, and then there's more of like a Sultan-esque kind of Arabian area called Oda. And so these different areas really comprised these central cities, kind of comprised Eorzea and made you travel through them. And then there were all these other areas. So there was like an area in it that you could go to where there were like these snow elves, and they were from a place called Kurthis Highlands, and they actually were very like regal and noble, but they were really different because you couldn't go to their hometown. And the reason why you couldn't go to their hometown is the king was so xenophobic that he didn't permit your party to go to it. And so it kind of held that back. And they eventually, in the latter expansions of Final Fantasy XIV, let you eventually visit this town in Heavensward. So that was one of the expansions of 14. But when the first version of Final Fantasy XIV was released, it was really bad. In fact, I know people, I had some friends in the past where one of them bought 14, bought a computer for it, spent $2,000 on upgrading everything, logged on to 14, saw how bad it was, and completely will never play a Square title ever again. There are a lot of people that won't ever go back to Square titles because of 14. So it did a very reparable damage to their company. And Square quickly realized that they fucked up. And what they did was they brought someone on board who didn't really have a lot of experience or any experience with MMORPGs at all, because they wanted to bring somebody on board that had a more kind of worldly mindset behind MMORPG development. And his name was Naoki Yoshida. And they brought him in and they were like, man, we fucked this up. Like, look at how bad this is. And Naoki's kind of, and he goes by Yoshi P. Yoshi P's drive behind this was, well, we're making this game. Has anybody bothered to really connect with the fans and talk with the fans and see what they want and see what they think about the game that they should play and they are playing and how it should be? And Square was like, well, that's ridiculous. You can't have a game that's developed and designed by the fans. That's crazy. And Yoshi P was like, well, let me try. You know, this thing's already pretty broken. Let me try to fix it. And so they basically kind of gave him free reign. And what he had to do is through the series of patches, he made the original, and they call that 1.0. He made 1.0 playable to a point, but it was still pretty broken. There were areas of maps where you would run along that, because the original developers ran out of resources, they just took the same area and copy pasted it. So you will run through like 5 miles of forest and just see the same area over and over and over again and encounter the same enemies over and over and over again without really getting to a goal. The level pacing was really weird, so you could level really quick, but it punished you for getting too high level very quickly through something called the fatigue system. So if you were leveling too quick, it made you like stop leveling. So it kind of punished you for actually playing the game. Currency was really hard to work with, and just the glitchiness was still persistent throughout the whole entire thing. So what Yoshi P decided to do was actually one of the coolest things, and it actually kind of set the series up for some of the more bigger sort of story spectacles, and actually in some ways kind of set up Final Fantasy VII Remake for what it set out to do, was that the game became self-aware, in that he basically said, look, The players have said this is broken. It's obviously an unplayable mess. So what we're going to do is we're going to nuke it. And so what he did is he basically went ahead. He said, told all the players that as of a certain day, and I think this is back in like 2014 or 2015, that they were shutting it all down. And that was it. That it wouldn't be back for several years. Because what they were going to do is they were going to completely shut it down and redesign all of the maps in the story, but it wasn't going to be the original story. It was going to be a continuation of the already existing story. And so basically, Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 players were getting a whole new entire story altogether. And for completely free. So they didn't have to buy it again. They got free subscriptions when they came back. They actually became part of something called the Legacy List or Network. They got a special mount for staying on with the original for so long. Basically what happened and this really isn't a secret if you play the game, it's covered like in the first part of it. But basically there's this large like comet, that meteor that comes down, and it's got this like massive like enemy in it called a primal, and it causes this massive like chaos thing that pretty much lays waste to Eorzean. And that's it. Everyone dies, or a large portion of the population dies. There's wars that occur, and it's the apocalypse. And you beat the enemy. Later on in the remake, you find out like the enemy's still alive in some fashion, but I won't get into that. But you end up beating the enemy, but then the enemy wins. And so it was a real bummer. A lot of people hated it. They're like, this is ridiculous. Why do I have to wait 2 to 3 more years for this stupid thing to be designed, And so that was it. You can actually go online on YouTube if you're actually familiar and watching it. Want to go ahead and watch it. If you type up the end of Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, somebody actually recorded the last like 30 minutes of it. And you'll see how janky the running is and the engine is, and it just looks horrible. And so, yeah, and that was it. And people were thanked for, their business, and that was it. And Yoshi P said that he would send out emails and letters and press releases when the new, game was ready to be launched again, and that was it. And nobody heard of it. And then about 1 to 2 years later, there was a press release that went out about Final Fantasy 14, A Realm Reborn. And this was the re-release. And people tried it out, and they were shocked. They took all the copy-paste maps, and they streamlined them. The enemies were more streamlined. It felt more quicker. It felt more intuitive. Your skill sets, it felt more intuitive. They had this really cool job system where your character, you didn't have to like make 80 different copies of like different characters like you would with WoW. If you wanted to play like, hunters, and if you wanted to play like a tank class, which is like a warrior. And I'll talk a little bit more about classes when we get to the WoW part of this video. But it lets you have just so much flexibility with one character. And people loved it. And the storyline was engaging. Because it wasn't, a rehash of the original, it made the original players want to play. But for people that were picking it up, it was very easy to get into because the lore of the original was told through a variety of cinematics and stories that got you into it as soon as you started playing the game. And it was just an instant success. In fact, it was like heralded as one of the biggest comebacks, not only for Final Fantasy, but also for MMORPGs, because at that time, WoW was kind of on the decline. And unfortunately, WoW has kind of been on sort of semi-slow decline throughout the years. You know, depending on who you talk to. Some people are like WoW diehards that will play it forever. But from a lot of people that I've talked to, it is on a slow and steady decline from what it was. And I mean, the game is almost, 16 years old, It's going to not be the freshest thing ever. It's going to be very old. And, I think that's part of it too, even though they've done graphical updates and try to modernize it. You're still going to have, it's a 16-year-old engine for a video game. But all that to be said, it had really great success, and it spawned 3 expansion packs for it. Heavensward, Stormblood, and the latest one, which is Shadowbringers. And the reason why this game is so good is not just because it's a fun MMO, it's also very, the storytelling behind it is so incredibly good. The characters are so easy to fall in love with, and everyone is just so interesting in this MMO. Even ones that do like side quests, or like, they're like, when you play it, they're like, they have like little blue crosses or pluses underneath an exclamation mark. Even the ones that there's like side quests, even those characters are really interesting and fun. And they're always doing like different things with it. They're always doing like patch quests, which means they just add on new content until the next expansion. They do like special like episodic quests, so they'll do ones that link to other Final Fantasy games. And it's really cool. And then, like I was talking before, there's the whole class system, which lets you just take one character and just have fun with it as much as you can. So for me, in this game, I started out more from, because I usually play rogue type characters in these kinds of games. I started out as a rogue, and then I sort of upgraded my way to become a ninja. And then when we got into the city in Heavensward, which is Ishgard, with the snow hells, I became a machinist, so I got a pistol, and because I love, shooting and gun ranges and all that stuff, I was like, this is fun, and so I got that. And then my end one was this tank class called Gunblade, which if you played Final Fantasy VIII, it's the sword that Squall, the main protagonist from that game, uses. And so a tank, is really good within the game. You actually do a lot of running, and you're going through dungeons and all that stuff. So, and you lead a party, which I think is always fun. So for me, I really enjoyed the ability to be just so flexible within this game. But the story is fantastic. In fact, the last one, Shadowbringers, has one of the most unique bosses that you will ever play against, in that at the end of it, you will actually feel more remorse for killing a boss than actually if you didn't. And I won't spoil it in case you see this video, the like 5 of you that watch this and say like, oh, like, I'd be really interested in trying that. I want to play it from start to finish. I definitely would advise you to definitely play Shadowbringers. It is one of the best stories I think I've ever played in a game. And the coolest thing for me is I actually got into it because some of my friends were playing it. So, I was promised this earlier in the video, I'd go into my sort of WoW history. And so I actually started playing WoW when I met my ex on, through WoW. Not through WoW, but we met online through Belly Builders. But we started talking about MMORPGs. And he's like, we should play WoW together. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to play one of those. Because I played Final Fantasy XI and it was really hard. And then on the Dreamcast, I played another MMORPG, which was called Phantasy Star Online. I tried like way early 2000 ones like Earth and Beyond and Anarchy Online. And they were just all really hard and very, very complicated. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this again. This is a big commitment. But and you have to pay a subscription fee, and he's like, no, just go ahead and try it. So I got WoW, and I was like hooked on it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I like the fact that you can make different classes. So a little bit about the classes. With a tank class, you're basically leading a party, and you're kind of like a shield for the party, while the damage dealers kill the boss or whatever. And you can fight too, but it's really the purpose of like you protecting the party, not really doing damage. And then there's like damage dealing classes where your purpose is just to take down enemies, which is a lot of fun. And so those are things like rogues, ninjas, hunters that, have animals that fight for the hunter, where you can shoot them, warlocks, mages, summoners, all of those types of things. And then there's healing classes, which I will never play. Because I absolutely hate healing. I've tried it a few times, and people are either too stupid and they won't like stay out of the way of enemies, and I get frustrated, or I just end up like rage quitting, and I end up just quitting the dungeon because people are dumb. So yeah, I don't heal. But those are the different class types, and basically the goal MMORPG 101 is basically to, when you enter a dungeon, is you all have to work together to get through the dungeon, fight enemies, gain experience, and then at the end of it kill a large boss. And it's just like Dungeons and Dragons, except it's on the computer. And so WoW was fun, and it was really interesting, but it was one of those things where it didn't really grab me at the time, and so I took a really long break from MMORPGs, like about a year or two. And then I started playing a few other ones like Pirates of the Burning Sea, Warhammer Online, Star Trek Online, which, as some of you may know, I'm a huge Trekkie, so that was a disaster when that game came out, but then later on they revamped it, much like Final Fantasy XIV, and it's amazing. And if you're a Trekkie, I highly recommend you to try it out. It's good, at least for the generic, like, regular storyline. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I didn't play it, and then I had a weird time in my life where I sort of was in between jobs, and I had 3 months where I was kind of going to school and trying to figure things out. And WoW was there, and WoW sort of helped me kind of work through that. And I met some really good friends in the gaming community on WoW, and we ended up being really good friends. And in fact, a few of them were actually pretty good friends to this day and still hang out. So WoW built some pretty lasting relationships for me, and it will always hold a soft spot in my heart. But Final Fantasy XIV is just so much better in every way, shape, and form. The graphics, the story, the characters, the dungeons, the community is just nicer. And I hate to like use this video to really crap on WoW, but it's really cool experience. So yeah, so I know that they are in the midst now of releasing more patch material. We're about halfway into where they'll be releasing a new expansion. I don't know how much life the series has left in it. I hope they at least release like 1 to 2 more expansions, at least to wrap up the overarching story. But if you're interested in like games that provide a lot of flexibility, but yet are easy to really get into, games that have really engaging storylines, but do have elements of multiplayer type things within them, games that allow you to experience the game always in a different way with these new jobs, I highly recommend it. It isn't as social as World of Warcraft. There's definitely more of an onus of like, this is more about the single player story versus it's more being about the actual character, more about like the social part of it, where WoW technically has more of that. Final Fantasy XIV is more about that story piece to it. So I hope you will give it a try. If you're interested in more information on it, you always can message me on it and just say, hey, what's this about? I'm always interested in meeting new friends on the game, and play it with you and to show you about it. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And finally, I said before there was a tie into Final Fantasy VII Remake. Because the game was one of the first games that Square made that sort of made it self-aware, which meant that it basically the game was like, we're so bad, we're going to delete our storyline and actually redo it again. It actually kind of gave rise to the storytelling elements within Final Fantasy VII Remake, to a point. I mean, a little bit of that is in Kingdom Hearts, but it really, really cemented that in there in the Final Fantasy franchise. So, and plus, there's all kinds of cool things. If you're one of those people that loves to build a house and loves to design a house and wants it outside of Animal Crossing in a more serious setting, if you want to have glamour and you want to dress up and do fashion contests, Final Fantasy XIV is just so extremely customizable. There's literally something there for anybody. You want to go ahead and fish. Crafting is its own actual game within itself that has its own objectives and own storylines and own rewards. And then there's even something called the Blue Mage quest line, which is kind of in its own realm altogether. There's just so much to it. And so if you get it, I promise you'll be engaged in it for hours and you'll lose track of your life. And then you'll wonder why you spent, over, 500 hours playing a game. And then you realized, like me last year, that I wasted my whole year playing it. So, yeah. Plus, it's really great if you want to just sit around and snack a lot. Probably gained maybe about 25 pounds just eating, and playing that damn game. So, hopefully that's motivation for some of you out there that watches this. So, anyway, I hope you're all doing safe. Again, like in my last video, if you're able to donate to any of the websites that I posted, please do. One of my people that watched this pointed out that I spelled George Floyd's name wrong. I'm really sorry. I went ahead and I updated that. So please forgive me. But yes, please donate to the sites. Please continue advocating to your local lawmakers and congressmen. Please continue to protest. Please continue to get out there because Black lives do matter. And yeah, lots of work is still needing to be done. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for watching and listening to this. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will put another one on next week with another game that I'm really into. Talk to you later. Bye.